Dirty Bria Hartley back at it again with her shenanigans, and this time around, she had her eyes set on one Sophie, the trophy Cunningham.
Sophie Cunningham suffered a right knee injury on this play, and despite the potential severity of the injury, a big conversation point around this is that the WNBA is not doing enough to protect the safety of their players.
The Indiana Fever pulled out an overtime win against the Connecticut Sun. But let's be real, this wasn't triumph. This was survival. Kelsey Mitchell exploded for 38 points. Sophie Cunningham went down with a brutal knee injury, and Bria Hartley, she turned reckless into criminal. This game revealed everything wrong and everything fragile. The Indiana Fever came into this matchup with playoff hopes dangling by a thread. Facing the Connecticut Sun, a team with one of the league's worst records, this should have been straightforward. Instead, it turned into chaos. Think about it. The Fever needed overtime to beat a 6-27 squad. That's not dominance, that's desperation. Every possession felt heavier than it should have been. Every missed shot a reminder that this team is far from steady. When you're clinging to the last playoff spot, games like these aren't about style, they're about survival. But what does it say when survival takes everything out of you? Fans expected an easy ride, yet what they got was a roller coaster nobody asked for. From the jump, Indiana looked flat, unprepared, and out of rhythm. By halftime, they were down 20. That's not a playoff mentality, that's playing with fire. And while the scoreboard shows a win, anyone who watched knows this game raised more questions than it answered. The Fever showed grit, yes, but they also showed just how fragile they've become without depth and consistent leadership. Let's cut straight to the ugliest moment. Bria Hartley barreled straight into Sophie Cunningham's leg like she was auditioning for an NFL offensive line. That wasn't accidental. That was a reckless football cut block, and it was illegal in every sense of the word. Watch her eyes, and she's looking right at Sophie's leg before collapsing. That isn't clumsy. That's targeted. This is what makes fans furious. Sophie's been the glue holding Indiana together since Clark went down, and Hartley made sure to rip that apart. She should be staring at a 20-game ban for that nonsense. Call it what it is: dangerous, dirty, and unforgivable. You can't call yourself a professional and pull stunts like that, because that isn't basketball. That's a cheap shot straight out of a playbook this league shouldn't ever tolerate. And let's not pretend this is new for Hartley. She's been reckless everywhere she's been, always on the edge of control. Last night, she crossed the line. The league can't just shrug this off with a fine or suspension. If you want to protect stars, if you want fans to take the product seriously, you have to set the standard. Hartley has no place endangering players like Sophie Cunningham. But let's not just stop at Hartley. Where was the Connecticut coach in all of this? When a player repeatedly acts out of control, the responsibility doesn't end with her. It begins with leadership. Coaches set the culture. They decide what's tolerated, what's reinforced, what's allowed to continue. Hartley's reckless play has been obvious for a long time, and yet nothing was done to rein it in. That's why this falls directly on the Connecticut sideline. He's let this simmer until it boiled over into a dangerous hit that could sideline one of the Fever's most important players. Good coaches keep their players disciplined, smart, and aware of what crosses the line. Instead, we saw a coach who either looked the other way or didn't care enough to fix it. That makes him just as responsible for the fallout. When a player like Hartley dives into knees, the consequences aren't just for Sophie, they ripple across the entire league. It's injuries like these that derail seasons, kill playoff dreams, and put careers in jeopardy. So yes, fans should be furious at Hartley, but they should be just as furious at the coach who allowed this dirty culture to fester unchecked. The moment Sophie went down, the entire arena went quiet. You could see it in the players' faces. They knew this wasn't just another knock. Trainers rushed in, towels came out to cover the scene, and Sophie couldn't even put weight on the leg. That's when the fear sets in. For the Fever, losing Sophie is more than just losing a starter. She's been the glue of this roster, the tough defender, the scrappy playmaker, the steady presence through all the chaos of Clark's absence. She doesn't whine, she doesn't make excuses, she just competes. And suddenly, she was gone. From that moment, the Fever looked rattled, and it showed. The bench sank. The energy dropped. It wasn't until the second half that they found any fight at all, but by then, they were digging out of a 20-point hole. The bigger question now is long-term. Was it an ACL? Was it the kneecap? The MCL? Nobody knows yet, but every guess leans towards serious. If Sophie is out for the season, this team's depth just collapsed completely. And if Indiana was already struggling, what happens now without their emotional leader on the floor? If there was one bright light in this chaos, it was Kelsey Mitchell. She dropped 38 points, with almost everything coming in the second half and overtime. That's not just scoring, that's carrying a team on your back when everyone else looked done. Mitchell hit dagger threes, attacked the lane, and flat out refused to let the Fever fold. And the craziest part? You could see the exhaustion on her face. Every possession was draining, but she kept going. That's leadership. That's veteran grit. Mitchell isn't always the headline in Indiana, but nights like this remind you exactly why she's been the anchor for years. Without her, this game is a blowout loss. Without her, the playoff dream is dead. It's not sustainable, but it was heroic. You can question rotations, you can criticize coaching, but you can't question what Kelsey Mitchell just did. She bailed out the entire franchise in one night, and that deserves respect. The win belongs to her, not to the game plan, not to the coaching staff. She single-handedly dragged Indiana across the finish line. Mitchell was the star, but she didn't stand completely alone. Aaliyah Boston gave 14 points and 13 boards, battling inside even when the offense wasn't running through her. Natasha Howard chipped in with 18 points and 9 rebounds, one of the few consistent sparks across both halves. And Lexi Hall, she knocked down the dagger three late in the game and grabbed a clutch rebound when it mattered most. That's the kind of contribution that keeps hope alive, even if it doesn't always show up on highlight reels. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't dominant, but these moments mattered. Still, let's be honest. 2 of the big 3 showed up, but Boston remains inconsistent. As much as she delivered a double-double, she's looked hesitant at times, not the dominant force fans expected. The supporting cast gave enough, just enough to survive. But just enough isn't a recipe for a playoff run. If Indiana wants to climb, they need Boston fully unleashed, Howard steady, and Hull reliable from deep. Otherwise, it's Kelsey Mitchell or bust. This win doesn't erase the bigger problem, Stephanie White's coaching. It should never take overtime to beat a team with 6 wins all season. And it wasn't just the struggle, it was the lack of adjustments, the late rotations, the uninspired sets. Even Jason Whitlock, who usually defends White, said during the game, "Fire Stephanie White." That tells you everything. The truth is, Mitchell saved her job last night. White didn't. A coach is supposed to steady the team, to bring composure when chaos hits, to put players in positions to succeed. Instead, Indiana looked lost until their star simply took over. That's not coaching, that's luck. You can't lean on career nights forever. You can't expect miracles when your system doesn't create consistency. White's seat is hot, and it should be. Because if Mitchell hadn't gone nuclear, we'd be talking about another humiliating loss to a bottom team. And that, more than anything, is why fans have every right to question whether this staff is the right one to lead Clark, Boston, and this franchise into the future. What turned this game wasn't some genius scheme, it was raw momentum. Down 20 at halftime, the Fever had 2 choices: fold or fight. They came out flat in the third, but somewhere along the line, Mitchell flipped the switch. Suddenly, shots started falling, defensive energy picked up, and Howard's presence inside began to tilt the balance. That's when the comeback was born. Basketball is a game of runs, and this was Indiana's run at the right time. But here's the problem. Why did it take being humiliated for 2 quarters to spark life? Great teams dictate pace from the opening tip. Indiana reacted instead of attacked. They clawed back, yes, but it was desperation basketball, not dominance. The turning point was thrilling, but it also exposed the lack of structure. This was firefighting, not fire starting. And while fans loved the rally, analysts see the warning signs. You can't play with that kind of inconsistency and expect playoff success. The turning point saved the night, but it won't save the season. Step back and look at the last 3 games. Losses to the Mystics and the Wings, and an overtime escape against the Sun. That's 1-2 against the league's bottom feeders. That's not the record of a contender. That's the mark of a team in denial. Injuries are piling up, depth is gone, and even wins feel like defeats. The Fever were supposed to use this stretch to build momentum, to pad the win column against weaker squads. Instead, they've exposed themselves as fragile, inconsistent, and dangerously close to missing the playoffs altogether. Fans want to celebrate the resilience, But let's be honest, this team is underachieving. They have the talent to beat these teams comfortably, yet they're barely hanging on. It's not just about bad luck with injuries. It's about failing to impose identity on the floor. That's what separates playoff teams from lottery teams. And right now, the Fever look a lot closer to the wrong side of that line. Which brings us to Caitlin Clark. Stephanie White hinted that Clark might return before the end of the season. But after this, why would she? With Sophie likely out, Aerie and Sid gone, and depth shredded, what exactly is Clark coming back to? A team barely scraping into the playoffs, only to get bounced in the first round? Or worse, risking another injury with nothing meaningful to gain? If you're the franchise, you have to think long-term. Protect your superstar, don't throw her back into a broken roster for pride. And if you're Clark, you're looking at the bigger picture: longevity, health, championships down the line. The Fever survived the Sun, but at a massive cost. Sophie Cunningham's injury cast a shadow. Bria Hartley embarrassed herself and endangered a player's career. And the Connecticut coach revealed just how unchecked this culture has become. Yes, Mitchell's 38 points were unforgettable, but the bigger takeaway is simple. This was a disaster disguised as victory. Now the question is for the fans. Do you call this resilience, or do you call it the league's worst habits on full display?